The phone call came at midnight. Jackson Browne was in his hotel room in Denver, halfway through a tour, sitting on the edge of the bed with his boots still on, too wired from the show to sleep. When he answered, the voice on the other end was familiar but strained. It was Glenn Frey. They exchanged the usual pleasantries, the surface level catching up that old friends do when they haven't talked in months. But Jackson could hear something underneath. A tightness, a hesitation. "I need to ask you something," Glenn said finally. Jackson waited. "We're working on the new album, Don Henley and I. It's not going well. There's some tension, and we need someone who can come in and help mediate. Someone we both trust. Someone who's not inside all this." Jackson didn't say anything right away. He'd heard rumors. Everyone in the Los Angeles music scene had heard rumors. The Eagles were fracturing. Don and Glenn were at each other's throats. The rest of the band was caught in the middle. Albums were taking longer. Tours were getting canceled. The machine that had built one of the biggest bands in the world was breaking down from the inside. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that," Jackson said carefully. "You are," Glenn insisted. "You know both of us. You've worked with both of us. And you're not trying to take sides. That's what we need. Someone neutral." Jackson looked out the window at the Denver skyline. Lights scattered across the darkness like dropped stars. Thought about saying no. About explaining that neutrality was a myth, that stepping into someone else's war never ended well, that there were some things friendship couldn't fix. But Glenn's voice had something in it that made him pause. Not desperation exactly, but something close. A plea wrapped in professional courtesy. "Let me think about it," Jackson said. "Don't think too long. We're on a schedule. The label's breathing down our necks." They hung up. Jackson sat in the silence of his hotel room and felt the weight of what he'd just been asked to do. He knew both men well, had written with them, played with them, shared stages and studios and long nights where the music felt like the only thing that mattered. But he also knew that what Glenn was really asking wasn't about music. It was about choosing. About stepping into the space between two people who'd stopped being able to talk to each other and trying to translate. And translation always meant someone felt misunderstood. 3 days later, he was in Los Angeles. The studio was in the Valley, a nondescript building that had seen better decades. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and unspoken tension. Glenn was at the mixing board when Jackson walked in. He stood, smiled, shook Jackson's hand like nothing was wrong. But his grip was too tight. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks for coming," Glenn said. "Really, this means a lot." Don was in the tracking room, sitting on an amp with his arms crossed, staring at nothing. When he saw Jackson through the glass, he nodded but didn't get up. Jackson walked in, extended his hand. Don shook it, but the gesture felt mechanical. Obligatory. "Glenn called you," Don said. Not a question. A statement. "He did. And what did he tell you?" Jackson chose his words carefully. "That you're working on something important and could use a fresh perspective." Don smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Is that what he said? A fresh perspective?" Jackson didn't respond. He could feel the trap being set. Could sense that anything he said would be used as ammunition in whatever argument was already raging. Don stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot. "You know what the problem is, Jackson? The problem is that some people think they're the only ones with vision, that their ideas are the only ones that matter. And anyone who disagrees is just being difficult." "I'm not here to take sides," Jackson said quietly. "Then why are you here?" It was a fair question. And Jackson didn't have a good answer. He'd told himself he was here to help. To bridge whatever gap had opened up between two talented people who'd made incredible music together. But standing in that room, feeling the cold weight of Don's stare, he realized he'd walked into something that couldn't be bridged. This wasn't a creative disagreement. This was personal. This was years of resentment and competition and ego compressed into a space too small to hold it all. Glenn came into the tracking room. "Did you tell him about the song?" Don's jaw tightened. "I was getting to it." "We have this track," Glenn said, talking to Jackson but looking at Don. "It's almost done. But there's one section the bridge where we can't agree. Dawn wants it one way, I want it another, and we've been going in circles for 2 weeks. Play it for me, Jackson said. They went back into the control room. Glenn hit play. The song filled the space. It was good, better than good. The verses were tight. The chorus soared. But when the bridge came, Jackson heard it immediately. The tension. The section felt like two different ideas forced together. Like a conversation where both people were talking but neither was listening. When it ended, Glenn looked at Jackson expectantly. So, what do you think? Jackson took a breath. I think you're both right. Glenn's face fell. That's not helpful. I mean, you both hear something true, but you're hearing different truths, and you're trying to make them fit into the same space. Don leaned back in his chair. So what are you saying, that we need to write 2 different songs? I'm saying maybe you need to figure out whose song this is. The room went quiet. Glenn and Don looked at each other. Something unspoken passed between them. Something old and complicated and sharp. It's our song, Glenn said finally. We wrote it together. Did you? Jackson asked. Or did you both write parts and then try to stitch them together? Don stood up abruptly. I need some air. He walked out. The door slammed behind him. Glenn exhaled slowly, rubbed his face with both hands. You see what I'm dealing with? Jackson didn't respond. He watched through the window as Don paced the parking lot, hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders tight with frustration. He doesn't want to compromise, Glenn continued. He thinks his way is the only way, and I'm supposed to just go along with it because, I don't know, because he's Don Henley. Because his ego can't handle being questioned. Is that really what this is about? Jackson asked quietly. Glenn looked at him. What do you mean? I mean, is this about the bridge, or is it about something else? Glenn was quiet for a long time. Then he said, We're not the same people we were when we started this band. We want different things. We have different priorities. And we're trying to pretend we still fit together when we don't. Jackson nodded. So why keep pretending? Because of the label, because of the fans, because of what we've built, you don't just walk away from that. Even if staying is killing you? Glenn didn't answer, just stared at the mixing board like it held answers it didn't have. Don came back in, sat down without looking at anyone. Let's try it again, Jackson's version, where we figure out whose song it is. It's not my version, Jackson said. It's just a question. Fine, let's answer it then. Don looked at Glenn. Is this your song or mine? It's ours, Glenn said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, Don said. It's not. It started as mine, you came in later, added your parts, and now you want to change the core of it. Make it something it's not. I'm trying to make it better. You're trying to make it yours. The accusation hung in the air. Jackson felt the urge to intervene, to say something that would lower the temperature. But he stayed quiet, because this wasn't about him. This was something that had been building for years, and he was just the audience for its collapse. Glenn stood up. You know what? Fine. It's your song, take it. Do whatever you want with it, I don't care anymore. He walked out. This time he didn't slam the door. He just left, and somehow that felt worse. Don sat in the silence that followed. After a moment he looked at Jackson. You think I'm the problem, don't you? I don't think there's a problem. I think there are 2 people who see things differently and can't find a way to communicate that doesn't feel like an attack. That's a diplomatic answer. It's an honest one. Don leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You want to know the truth? I'm tired. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of compromising. I'm tired of pretending that collaboration means giving up pieces of yourself until there's nothing left. Then why are you still here? Because I don't know how to not be here. This is all I know. This band, this work. And if I walk away, what am I? Jackson understood that. The fear of losing your identity when it's tied to something larger than yourself. The way success can become a prison when you can't imagine life without it. You're still you, Jackson said. The band doesn't define that. Doesn't it? Don looked at him. You're solo. You don't have to answer to anyone. don't have to negotiate every decision, don't have to watch something you care about get diluted by committee. But that's not my reality. My reality is this, and it's suffocating me. Jackson thought about his own journey, about the choice to go solo. It hadn't been easy. There were trade-offs, loneliness, the full weight of responsibility. But there was also freedom, the ability to follow his vision without compromise, without having to explain or justify or defend every creative choice. "I can't tell you what to do," Jackson said. "But I can tell you that staying in something that's suffocating you isn't sustainable. Eventually something breaks." Don nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know." They sat in silence. Outside, the sun was setting. The studio lights felt harsh and artificial against the fading natural light. Glenn came back an hour later. He looked calmer, resigned. He and Don talked quietly in the corner while Jackson pretended not to listen. They decided to table the song, work on something else, come back to it when they had perspective. But Jackson could see it in their faces. They weren't going to come back to it. The song would join the pile of unfinished ideas, casualties of a partnership that had run its course but couldn't end because too much was riding on it. Over the next few days, Jackson stayed, tried to help where he could, offered suggestions, played some guitar parts. But mostly he watched two talented people who'd created something extraordinary struggle under the weight of what they'd built. Watched them try to communicate and fail. Watched them hurt each other with words that were true but couldn't be said without causing damage. He'd been warned. A mutual friend had pulled him aside before he came to L.A. "Don't get involved," the friend had said. "It's a mess, and you'll just end up being collateral damage." Jackson had ignored the warning, thought he could help, thought his outside perspective would be valuable. But now, sitting in the studio as Glenn and Don barely spoke to each other, he realized the friend had been right. You can't mediate a war when both sides are convinced they're defending something essential. You just become another casualty. On his last day there, Don pulled him aside. "Thanks for trying," he said. "I know it didn't work, but I appreciate it. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. There's nothing to do. This has been coming for a long time. Glenn and we're done, we just haven't admitted it yet. What happens now?" Don shrugged. "We finish the album because we have to. We do the tour because we're contractually obligated. And then, I don't know, maybe it ends. Maybe we take a break. So long it becomes permanent. Maybe we keep going through the motions until something forces our hand." Jackson nodded. "For what it's worth, what you built together, it mattered. It still matters, even if it has to end." "Does it?" Don's voice was quiet. "Or does it just become another cautionary tale about ego and ambition?" Jackson didn't have an answer for that. He flew back to Denver that night, returned to his own tour, his own music, his own creative process that didn't require negotiation or compromise. And he felt grateful for it in a way he hadn't before. But he also felt sad. Sad for Don and Glenn. Sad for what they'd lost even while they were still together. Sad for the music that wouldn't get made because the cost of making it had become too high. Months later, he heard the album when it was released. The song they'd fought over wasn't on it. He wondered whose decision that had been, whether they'd agreed or whether one had simply given up fighting. The album was successful. Critics praised it. Fans bought it. The Eagles continued to be the Eagles, at least from the outside. But Jackson knew what it had cost, knew the weight of that success, knew that sometimes the biggest achievements come with the deepest wounds. Years after, when the band finally did break up, Jackson wasn't surprised. He'd seen it coming that week in the studio, seen the fault lines, seen two people who'd created something beautiful together reach the point where staying together meant destroying themselves. He thought about calling, reaching out to both of them. But what would he say? That he understood? That he was sorry? That he'd been there and seen it and wished it could have been different? Instead, he wrote, not a song about them, not directly, but a song about collaboration, about the beauty and the cost of creating with others, about how sometimes the most generous thing you can do is let something end, about how love and respect don't always mean staying. Sometimes they mean knowing when to walk away. He never told anyone the song was inspired by that week in the studio, never connected the dots publicly. But when he played it, he thought about Glenn and Dawn, about standing between them and realizing there was no middle ground, that some conflicts can't be resolved because they're not really about the surface issue. They're about deeper things: identity, control, the fear of losing yourself in something larger. Jackson had been warned. He'd gotten caught in the crossfire anyway. But standing in it, witnessing it, had taught him something he couldn't have learned any other way: that some partnerships have expiration dates, that forcing them past that date doesn't preserve what was good. It just turns something beautiful into something painful. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is step back, stop trying to fix what's breaking. Stop pretending that enough effort or enough goodwill or enough mediation can overcome the simple fact that, too, people have grown in different directions. Let it break. Let it end. Let both people walk away and become who they need to be, even if that means the thing you built together doesn't survive. He carried that with him, that understanding, that sad, necessary wisdom. And late at night, when he played that song, the one no one knew was about them, he hoped somehow they heard it. Not as judgment, not as commentary, just as recognition, as someone saying, "I saw you. I saw what you were fighting for. I saw what it cost. And I understand why it had to end." The music played on. The song unfolded. And in the space between notes, Jackson held the memory of that week. The warning he'd ignored, the crossfire he'd stepped into, the lesson he'd learned about when to help and when to simply witness, when to bridge and when to let the distance speak its own truth. Some things can't be fixed. Some wars can't be ended. Sometimes you just stand there, holding space for people you care about, and watch them fight battles that have no winners. And when it's over, you walk away carrying pieces of their pain, understanding more about the cost of creation than you ever wanted to know. The studio lights, the cigarette smoke, the silence between. The song that never made the album, the friendship that survived but changed, the band that ended years after it was already over. Jackson remembered it all, carried it quietly, let it inform his choices, let it teach him about boundaries and limitations, and the difference between helping and enabling. And he kept making music, solo, on his own terms, grateful for the freedom, respectful of the cost, understanding finally why the warning had been given, and why sometimes the most important lessons come from the crossfire you were told to avoid.